Racist cop restrains black woman not knowing her encrypted distress ping summons elite operators. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, back to our main character. Angela Johnson walked down the street, her mind focused on the day ahead. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a warm glow over the city as she moved with purpose. Dressed in a simple but professional outfit, she could have been anyone, a woman going about her day, blending into the crowd. But Angela wasn't just anyone. Beneath her calm exterior lay a woman of incredible strength. Someone who had worked tirelessly to earn her place in the world. Yet, as she walked, the familiar feeling of being judged began to creep in. The whispers, the sideways glances, the subtle but unmistakable recognition of her as different. As she passed a group of people chatting on the sidewalk, she caught a glimpse of Officer Tom Reynolds standing nearby, his eyes scanning the crowd. Angela didn't think much of it at first. She had seen officers like him before. Arrogant, self-assured, and with a sense of entitlement that radiated from them. But today, something was different. As she walked, she felt his gaze on her. At first, she tried to ignore it, but it didn't take long before his steps matched hers, and a voice cut through the air. "Hey, stop right there." Officer Reynolds barked, his tone sharp. Angela stopped in her tracks, her heart beating a little faster, but she remained composed. She had learned to control her emotions over the years, to remain calm even in the most intense situations. "What's this about?" she asked, keeping her voice steady. "You got something you're hiding, don't you?" The officer's words were laced with suspicion, but Angela didn't flinch. She knew exactly what was happening. This wasn't about her. This was about him, about his need to assert power, to control. "I don't have anything," Angela replied, her voice unwavering. But Reynolds wasn't convinced. "Empty your pockets," he ordered, his hand resting on the baton at his side. Angela knew this was a test, a power play meant to intimidate, and she wasn't about to let him win. She slowly reached into her pocket and pulled out a phone, a set of keys, and a small wallet, placing them in his hand. But as she did, something happened, something no one expected. A faint beep, barely noticeable, came from Angela's phone. It was a distress ping, a signal sent in silence, a signal that summoned help from somewhere far beyond the reach of this simple street. Angela had done what she had to do, activated the alert without hesitation. As Officer Reynolds stared at the items in his hand, clearly unsatisfied, he failed to notice the change in the air. The tension had shifted. Something was coming. Angela's calm demeanor didn't falter. She didn't need to shout to fight. She had done her part. The next move was out her hands, and within moments, a group of elite operators, trained and equipped for situations like this, moved in from the shadows. They weren't just her backup, they were the ones who would take control of the situation. Angela felt a small but satisfying sense of relief. This time, it wasn't about her fighting back with force. It was about justice finding its way through a different channel. As Reynolds stood there, still holding her belongings, he felt a presence behind him. The operators were here, and soon he would realize just how far out of his depth he truly was. Angela stood still, her heart racing but her expression unwavering. Officer Reynolds, still unaware of the silent call for help that had already been made, continued to scrutinize her. He gripped the phone and wallet she had handed him, but his eyes kept darting back and forth, as if searching for something more. Something he could use to assert his authority. He didn't like being ignored, and he certainly didn't like being made to feel powerless. The weight of the situation hung in the air. The tension was palpable, and Angela could feel every moment stretch, but she refused to give him what he wanted. She remained calm, every part of her being focused on what she knew was coming next. Officer Reynolds looked over his shoulder, as if expecting more people to come out of the crowd. The surrounding streets were quiet, save for the occasional car passing by, But there was a subtle shift in the atmosphere, a momentary stillness that felt almost unnatural. Just then, a black SUV pulled up to the curb, its tinted windows reflecting the soft glow of the streetlights. The vehicle came to a stop right beside them, and before the engine had even fully turned off, the doors opened and several figures in tactical gear swiftly exited. They moved with precision, silently, like shadows emerging from the night. The scene had changed in an instant. Angela's calm demeanor remained, but inside, she could feel a small sigh of relief. Her team was here. Officer Reynolds, still distracted by the phone and wallet in his hands, didn't notice the newcomers at first. His mind was still focused on finding a reason to escalate the situation. His gaze finally locked onto Angela again. "You think you're gonna get away with this?" He spat, his voice thick with arrogance. But before she could respond, one of the operators, a woman with short dark hair and an air of authority, stepped forward and placed a hand on his shoulder. "It's time to let her go," she said, her voice steady but commanding. Reynolds stiffened, a surge of confusion passing through him. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his eyes narrowing. "You don't have the right." The woman didn't let him finish. "We're the right," she replied, her tone leaving no room for argument. Another figure, a tall man with a buzz cut, stepped in beside her. He flashed a badge that gleamed in the dim light, and Reynolds froze. His eyes flicked back and forth between the badge and the serious expressions on the operators' faces. Something clicked in his mind, but it was too late. He had crossed the line, and now he was the one being watched. "You're not in charge here anymore," the man said quietly, his voice carrying an air of finality. "Step aside." For a moment, Reynolds hesitated, his face flushed with a mix of anger and humiliation. But the look in the man's eyes was enough to convince him that continuing to challenge them would be a mistake. Reluctantly, he stepped back, lowering the phone and wallet in his hands. Angela stood tall, her composure unshaken. The operators had done what they needed to do. The balance of power had shifted in a way that could never be undone. Officer Reynolds had overestimated his own control, and now the consequences were clear. As the operators surrounded him, their presence radiating authority, Angela took a slow breath, knowing that this moment would mark the beginning of something much bigger. She hadn't needed to fight. She had only needed to trust in the system that would hold people like Reynolds accountable. This wasn't just about her. It was about standing up for what was right, for pushing back against a system that too often turned a blind eye to injustice. As the operators guided Reynolds away, Angela felt a deep sense of satisfaction, knowing that today, justice had found its way. The battle wasn't over, but it was a victory nonetheless. Angela stood still, watching as Officer Reynolds was escorted away by the elite operators. She had always known that moments like these would come, but it never made them any easier to endure. The tension that had once filled the air was now replaced by a profound silence. The operators, efficient and calm, moved in perfect synchronization, handling the situation with the kind of professionalism Angela had come to expect from her team. She didn't need to say anything. They knew exactly what to do. As they took Reynolds further down the street, Angela allowed herself a brief moment of reflection. She could feel the weight of the day's events settling on her shoulders, but she also knew she had played her part. The call had been made, and the system had worked as it was supposed to. Yet there was still more to do. The operator with the buzz cut approached her, his face calm but serious. "You did well," he said, his voice low but sincere. Angela nodded. "It's not over yet." "No, it's not," he agreed. "But today was a start. We'll take it from here." He paused for a moment, studying her face. "Are you sure you're okay?" Angela smiled faintly. "I've been through worse." The operator gave a short nod, and then turned to rejoin the rest of the team. Angela watched them for a moment, her mind racing with the implications of what had just happened. She had always known that her work, her role, was one of secrecy and subtlety. But today had been different. Today, the balance of power had shifted in a way that was undeniable. She couldn't help but wonder if this was the beginning of something bigger, something that could change the way the system operated. As the team disappeared into the distance, Angela began walking in the opposite direction. She had no particular destination in mind, only the need to clear her head. The city around her seemed ordinary, nothing more than a blur of buildings, streets, and faces. Yet, beneath the surface, there was an undercurrent of change. She could feel it, a growing awareness that things were about to shift. But it wasn't just the city that had changed, it was her. Angela knew that today. She had taken a stand. But there would be more days like this, more challenges, more moments when the fight for justice would have to continue. She couldn't rest, not yet. And she wouldn't. She had come too far, endured too much, to turn back now. The path ahead was still unclear, but Angela was ready to face whatever came next. As the evening sky darkened, she moved with purpose, knowing that the future was in her hands. The battle was just beginning. As Angela walked through the city, her mind was clouded with the events of the past few hours. The world around her seemed unchanged, the usual hum of traffic and chatter filling the air. Yet, for Angela, nothing would ever feel quite the same again. She had never been one to question the system. She had always worked within its boundaries, a silent agent, a force in the shadows. But today had shaken something deep within her. It wasn't just the confrontation with Officer Reynolds. It was the realization that she had the power to change things, that she had been placed in a position where she could truly make a difference. As she moved through the streets, she couldn't shake the feeling that this moment was a turning point, that the fight for justice was just beginning. Angela's phone buzzed in her pocket, breaking her from her thoughts. She pulled it out and glanced at the screen. A message from her team. Meeting at 8 p.m. Same place. We need to talk. She stopped for a moment, considering. Her instinct was to keep moving, to remain a step ahead, but something told her this meeting was important. She turned on her heel and headed toward the small cafe where she knew her team would be waiting. The cafe was located on a quiet street, hidden among the bustling city blocks. It had been their meeting spot for months, a place where they could discuss plans without drawing attention. Angela entered and found the team already seated at their usual table. There was no need for introductions. Everyone knew their roles. The group was a mix of experienced agents, each with their own skills, backgrounds, and secrets. At the head of the table sat Agent Parker, a man whose calm demeanor hid the sharpness of his mind. He looked up as Angela approached, offering her a nod of acknowledgement. "You're late," he said, but his voice was without judgment. "Just needed some time to think," Angela replied, taking a seat. Parker didn't press her further. Instead, he gestured to the group. "We've got a problem," he said, his tone serious. "Reynolds wasn't working alone. There's a bigger network involved. We've uncovered something that could go much deeper than we anticipated." Angela listened intently as Parker continued to outline the situation. There were whispers about corruption, systemic abuse, and individuals in high places who had been protecting each other for years. It was a web that stretched across the city, perhaps even further. "We need to act fast," Parker said, his eyes meeting Angela's. "This isn't just about Reynolds anymore. It's about exposing everything." Angela felt a chill run down her spine. She had known there was more to this than just a rogue officer, but hearing it laid out so clearly made it all the more real. This was no longer just a personal battle. It was a war against a system that had been broken for too long. The group began to strategize, discussing possible next steps, but Angela's mind was elsewhere. As they spoke, her thoughts kept drifting back to the moment with Reynolds. She had stood there, calm and in control, but deep inside, there was a fire burning. She wasn't going to stop. Not now. Not ever. The meeting continued for another hour, but Angela's resolve had already been set. As she left the cafe, the weight of what lay ahead pressed heavily on her shoulders, but she was ready. She wasn't just an agent anymore. She was a force for change. And this time, the system would have to answer for what it had allowed to happen. Angela didn't know exactly where this path would lead, but one thing was certain. She wasn't walking it alone. She had a team, a mission, and a purpose. And she wasn't backing down. Angela woke up early the next morning, the sun just beginning to rise over the horizon. The quiet hum of the city was still distant, but inside her apartment, she was wide awake, her mind racing with the plans and decisions that lay ahead. She knew that last night's meeting had only been the beginning. The system she had been working within for so long was far more corrupt than she could have ever imagined, and the people she had trusted the most were at the center of it. As she dressed, her movements were deliberate, every action part of a routine she had perfected over years. Yet today, everything felt different. The familiar surroundings seemed colder, the air thicker with the weight of her mission. She checked her phone for the latest updates from her team, but there was nothing new. The silence felt like a warning. After a quick breakfast, Angela grabbed her bag, slipping her phone and a few important documents into it before heading out. She knew she had to keep her focus, no matter the pressure or the stakes. The plan was simple: gather more information, dig deeper into the web of corruption, and find the key players who had been pulling the strings. But as Angela stepped outside, she felt an unmistakable sense of urgency. It was one thing to expose the system from the outside, but it was something else entirely to take on the people who had the power to destroy her if they knew who she really was. She was walking a fine line, one she couldn't afford to slip from. Her car was parked on the street, just a block away. She walked quickly, her eyes scanning the area for anything out of the ordinary. The city seemed peaceful, but there was a tension in the air that matched the chaos brewing in her mind. She got into the car and started the engine, heading toward the downtown area where the heart of the investigation lay. The streets were still relatively quiet, the early hour keeping most people inside. As she drove, her thoughts kept drifting back to the meeting with her team the night before. She couldn't shake the image of Agent Parker's face when he told her about the network they had uncovered. The corruption wasn't just localized to a few rogue officers. It was a widespread operation, with ties to government officials, high-level law enforcement, and influential figures in the business world. And they were all working together to cover up their tracks. As Angela neared the meeting location, she made a turn onto a quieter street, the familiar face of her destination appearing in the distance. It was a small, inconspicuous building tucked between a series of office complexes, easy to miss if you didn't know what you were looking for. She parked and walked to the entrance, her footsteps echoing in the otherwise silent street. Inside, the space was just as quiet. The team had already set up, their presence a reminder that they were all in this together. Angela entered the small office, where Parker and the rest of the team were gathered around a large table. The room was dimly lit, but the seriousness in the air made it feel as though the lights were brighter than they were. "We're running out of time," Parker said, looking at Angela as she sat down. "The people we're up against have connections everywhere. We need to move quickly before they realize we're onto them." Angela nodded, her mind focused. She had known the risks, but hearing them laid out so bluntly made them more real. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy, but it was the only road she had. "What's the next step?" Angela asked, her voice steady despite the pressure building inside her. Parker slid a set of documents across the table. "We need to find out who's financing the operation. These people are powerful, and they won't go down without a fight. We need to cut off their resources." Angela took the documents, scanning them quickly. Names, figures, and companies filled the pages. It was a start, but it wasn't enough. "I'll get to work on this immediately," Angela said. "I'll need all the help I can get." Parker nodded. "We're with you. Let's bring this down, one piece at a time." Angela stood, her resolve firm. The fight was far from over, but she was ready. No matter how deep the corruption ran, she wasn't backing down. She couldn't. Not now, not when she had finally begun to see the truth. The game had changed, and Angela was determined to win. As she walked out of the office, the city felt different to her. Still the same, but with a renewed sense of purpose. The path ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. She would stop at nothing to see justice done. Angela sat in the small, dimly lit room, the documents Parker had given her spread out in front of her. The weight of the information was starting to sink in. She had expected corruption, but what she found on these pages was something far more sinister. Powerful names, high-ranking officials, and multinational companies with ties to organized crime. This wasn't just a local issue. It was a system-wide problem that reached the highest levels. Angela's phone buzzed, snapping her back to the present. A quick glance at the screen showed a message from Parker. "We've got a lead on one of the financiers. Meet us at the warehouse in 30 minutes. Angela stood, grabbing her coat and her bag. The urgency of the message was clear. There was no time to waste. She quickly made her way to the parking garage, her thoughts racing. The financier could be the key to unraveling the entire network, but the risk was high. She knew this wasn't going to be easy. As she pulled out of the parking lot, the city streets blurred by the headlights of other cars, Angela felt the pressure of the situation weighing on her. She had been in tough spots before, but this felt different. The deeper she dug, the more dangerous it became. And yet, she couldn't stop now. Not when she was so close. The warehouse wasn't far from where she was. The building stood isolated, nestled between two old factories. It was the perfect spot for a covert meeting, hidden from the eyes of the public. Angela parked her car a few blocks away, making sure she wasn't being followed. As she approached the entrance, she spotted Parker standing by the door, his usual calm demeanor replaced by something else, something harder. "You made it," he said as Angela approached. His eyes were scanning the area, alert for any sign of trouble. "What's the situation?" Angela asked. Parker glanced over his shoulder, ensuring no one was nearby. "We got a man inside who's ready to talk. He's one of the financial backers behind the operation. But he's nervous, and he's not going to make it easy." Angela nodded, steeling herself for whatever was to come. She had dealt with informants before, some cooperative, others not so much, but this felt different. This man held a piece of the puzzle that could bring everything down. They entered the warehouse, the silence broken only by the sound of their footsteps echoing through the empty space. The dim light from the overhead bulbs cast long shadows on the walls, adding to the sense of unease. Parker led Angela to a small room in the back, where they found the informant sitting at a table, his hands trembling as he waited. "You're here for the right reasons," Angela said, her voice calm but firm as she sat across from him. He looked up at her, fear in his eyes. I don't know how much I can trust you. These people, He cut himself off, glancing nervously at the door. Angela leaned forward, her gaze intense. "You don't have to trust me. You just have to tell me what you know. You can make a choice right now. Help us take them down, or stay quiet and watch them destroy everything." The man swallowed hard, his eyes darting around the room as if weighing his options. After a long pause, he nodded, his voice barely a whisper. "It's bigger than I thought. They've got people everywhere. Police, judges, even some politicians. They've been laundering money, using offshore accounts to fund their operations." Angela listened intently, her mind racing as the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. "And who else is involved? Who's at the top?" she pressed. The informant hesitated, his hands shaking. "I don't know their names, but I know where they meet. They're planning something big. A transfer of funds, some kind of deal. It's happening soon. You have to stop it before it's too late." Angela's heart skipped a beat. This was it, the moment she had been working for, the key to everything. "Where's the meeting?" she asked, her voice steady. The informant gave her an address, one that Angela knew would take her to the heart of the operation. She stood up, motioning for Parker to follow her. "We got what we need. Let's move out." As they left the warehouse, Angela felt a renewed sense of determination. The pieces were coming together. The fight wasn't over, but they were one step closer to bringing the entire operation down. This was the moment she had been waiting for, and no matter what it took, she was going to see it through. The clock was ticking, and Angela wasn't going to let the people behind this get away with it. The end was in sight, but it was just the beginning of a much larger battle. Angela was ready for whatever came next. Angela and Parker arrived at the address the informant had provided, an unassuming warehouse tucked away in the industrial district. The building stood silently, its steel frame reflecting the early evening light. Angela's pulse quickened as she stepped out of the car. This was it, the moment that would either break or make everything they had been working for. As they approached the entrance, Angela signaled for Parker to take the rear. She moved quickly but cautiously, her senses sharp, every part of her mind focused on the task at hand. They had no idea who exactly would be inside, but the stakes were high. Whoever was running this operation was dangerous, and now Angela was closing in on them. She reached the door and paused for a moment, listening. The faint sounds of muffled voices drifted from inside. It was impossible to know for sure, but Angela knew that the meeting was already underway. She turned the handle slowly, taking a deep breath before stepping into the shadows of the warehouse. The interior was dimly lit, the smell of dust and rust filling the air. She could hear voices growing louder as she crept deeper into the building, staying as quiet as possible. Parker followed her closely, staying close enough to provide backup if necessary. They moved with purpose, sticking to the corners of the room to avoid detection. The voices ahead were clearer now. Angela could make out words, fragments of conversation, but they weren't enough to piece together the full picture. She edged closer, crouching low behind a stack of crates. From this vantage point, she could see the men gathered around a large wooden table, their faces shadowed by the overhead light. The conversation was tense, heated. One of the men, a middle-aged figure with a graying beard, was speaking in low, urgent tones. "The deal has to go through tonight. If we wait, we risk exposure. The money's already been transferred, and the shipments are on their way. We can't afford any mistakes." Angela's heart skipped a beat. This was what they had been waiting for. The deal. The one that could bring down the entire operation. She looked over at Parker, who gave a small nod, confirming that he had heard the same thing. This was it. This was the key to everything. But they needed more information. They needed to know who exactly was pulling the strings. As the conversation continued, Angela strained to hear every word. "What about the police?" one of the men asked, his voice a little higher. "Can we trust them?" The bearded man scoffed. "We have people in their pockets. We've made sure they're on our side. No one will stand in our way." Angela's blood ran cold. The corruption was deeper than they had even imagined. These men were not just dealing in illegal money. They were controlling the police, manipulating the system to their advantage. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. The time to act was now, but they needed to be careful. One wrong move, and everything they had worked for could come crashing down. Angela pulled out her phone and sent a quick message to her team. "Asterisk, we need to move now. Backup ready." Asterisk Parker gave her a nod, signaling that he was ready. The plan was in motion. It was time to shut this operation down. Angela took a deep breath, stepping out from behind the crates, her movements deliberate and controlled. "Gentlemen," she called out, her voice steady and strong. "I believe you've been expecting us." The men froze, their heads snapping in her direction. The tension in the room was palpable. For a moment, there was only silence, and then the bearded man spoke, his voice tinged with disbelief. "Who are you?" Angela's lips curled into a calm smile. "We're the ones who are going to bring your entire operation to an end." The men around the table exchanged nervous glances, but it was too late. The truth was out, and Angela was ready to take them down. The game had changed, and there was no going back now. The room was silent as Angela stood there, the men around the table frozen in shock. The bearded man's face twisted into a grimace, his hand instinctively reaching for his coat pocket. But before he could make a move, Parker stepped forward, his voice low and calm. "I'd suggest you don't do that," he said, his tone firm but not threatening. The tension in the room was thick, palpable, as the men glanced at each other, weighing their options. The moments seemed to stretch, time moving in slow motion as they all waited for the next move. Angela could feel her heart pounding in her chest, but she refused to show any sign of weakness. She had been preparing for this moment for too long. The bearded man finally spoke, his voice strained with uncertainty. "You think you could just walk in here and take us down? You have no idea who you're dealing with." Angela stepped forward, her eyes locking onto his with a steady gaze. "I know exactly who I'm dealing with," she replied, her voice unwavering. "And it's over. Your operation, your connections, it all ends now." A murmur rippled through the group, and Angela could see the fear in their eyes. They had been so confident, so certain that no one could touch them. But now they were trapped, and they knew it. The bearded man looked around the room, his gaze flicking to his associates, then to the door. Angela noticed the subtle shift in his posture, the tension in his shoulders as if he were preparing to make a break for it. But before he could act, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed from the far side of the warehouse. Angela's team had arrived, and they were ready. The operators, dressed in tactical gear, moved in with precision, their presence a reminder that the game had already changed. One of the men near the table, a younger figure with dark hair, stood up, his hands raised in surrender. Wait, please, he said, his voice trembling. We'll cooperate. We'll tell you everything. Angela tilted her head slightly, her gaze never leaving the bearded man. Everything, she asked, her voice steady. The younger man nodded quickly. Yes, everything. Just please don't let this go any further. We didn't know how deep this was going to get. We thought we could control it. Angela stepped closer, her eyes narrowing. You never had control, she said. You just thought you did. The room fell silent again, the weight of her words hanging in the air. Angela could feel the momentum building, the sense of victory within her reach. The men around the table were no longer confident. They were cornered, and they knew it. The bearded man opened his mouth to say something, but Angela cut him off. We're not here to negotiate, she said firmly. You're all going down. It's only a matter of time. As the operators moved in to arrest the men, Angela felt a surge of relief, though it was tempered by the knowledge that this was just one victory in a much larger war. The corruption ran deep, and there were still many players left to expose. But for the moment, this was a win, a clear sign that the system could be taken down. Angela turned to Parker, who was watching the scene unfold with a quiet satisfaction. This is just the beginning, she said. Parker nodded. We've got a long road ahead of us. Angela looked around the room, her eyes scanning the faces of the men who had once thought themselves untouchable. But we're ready for it, she replied. With that, Angela walked out of the warehouse, her team following close behind. The night air was cool, the city quiet once again. But this time, Angela didn't feel the weight of the world pressing down on her. She felt something different, hope. The fight wasn't over, but it had taken a significant turn, and Angela was determined to see it through to the end. As Angela walked out of the warehouse, the weight of what had just transpired settled in. The air was cool, the city still quiet, but there was an energy in her chest that refused to be ignored. They had made significant progress. Today was a victory, but Angela knew this was just one chapter in a much larger story. The corruption that ran through the veins of the system was far deeper than anyone could have anticipated, and though they had exposed a key player, the war wasn't over. She glanced at Parker as they walked toward the cars. He had been by her side through the entire investigation, his unwavering support a constant source of strength. What's next? Angela asked, her voice calm but steady. Parker paused for a moment before replying. We keep digging. This isn't going to end with just this warehouse. We've exposed some of their operations, but there's more to uncover. Much more. Angela nodded. She had already been preparing herself for the long road ahead. They had the momentum now, and she wouldn't stop until every last piece of this network was brought down. As they reached the cars, Angela couldn't help but think of the people who would be affected by their work. There were families, communities, and countless others who had suffered under the weight of the corruption they were fighting against. This was more than just a personal battle. It was about justice for them, for everyone who had been hurt by the system. She knew the road ahead would be difficult, filled with obstacles, and there would be moments when it would feel like everything was stacked against them. But today, Angela had seen the power of one moment, one decision to act, and that gave her the strength to keep going. We'll take them down, one by one, Angela said, more to herself than to Parker. The fight was far from over, but now they knew the extent of what they were up against. The path ahead was uncertain, but Angela wasn't afraid. As they drove off into the night, she couldn't help but feel that the tides were turning. The truth was out, and no matter how deep the darkness, they would shine a light on it. The city that had seemed so indifferent before now felt like a place of possibility. The work was hard, the risks high, but Angela was no longer just a part of the system. She was going to change it. And with each victory, no matter how small, they would move closer to bringing the justice that had been so long denied. The battle was far from over, But Angela was more determined than ever to see it through. The fight for justice, the fight for those who couldn't fight for themselves, it was just beginning.